Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
My guest today needs no introduction. Born in Greenwich, London in 1954, my guest reputedly stole 50p from his mother's purse to put an advert in a sweet shop window, advertising for a guitarist for his band. A man by the name of Glenn Tilbrook was the only person to respond. The rest is now history. They would form the popular British band Squeeze and jointly write and perform some of the most perfectly crafted songs in British pop history. Up the Junction, Cool for Cats, Tempted, Pulling Mussels from the Shell, Hourglass, Take Me I'm Yours, Goodbye Girl, Another Nail in My Heart, and many, many more. My guest has written songs for Jools Holland, Helen Shapiro, Elvis Costello, Elton John, and Wet, Wet, Wet. He's toured the globe, lived in New York, had a second career as a solo performer, and also managed Bryan Ferry. My guest has been involved in musical education, helping young artists to write and produce their own songs. I'm honoured to be joined today by a British musical treasure and a fine songsmith, that is Chris Difford. Good morning and a very warm welcome. Thank you. I feel honoured to have you on, and thank you for taking time out of your day to be a guest on Your Take.
Thank you for the introduction.
My pleasure. You join a whole host of, we've had a whole host of musical people on the programme. We've had David Knopfler from Dire Straits, the songwriter Martin Page, who've shared their stories and experiences of working in the music industry. So I'm interested to hear your story over the past 40 years. And I kind of wanted to go back, if you don't mind, to the very beginning, casting the clock back to the mid-1950s. You were born in Greenwich, London, November 4th in 1954. I wanted to ask your memories from your childhood and just give us a little bit of background on your parents, who they were, what they did for a living, and do you have any siblings?
Well, that's a pretty deep question. I've never been asked that before. It was a very simple life. My two brothers and myself. My mum was mum, and my dad worked at the local gasworks, and we lived pretty much in council property, and it was tight. Things were tight, but I've got nothing to complain about, really. It was a joyous childhood.
I want to move on to your schooling and just find out a little bit about which school you attended, and were they happy times in your life, your schooling years? And just wanted to ask which subjects you excelled in, and did you kind of go on to further education?
Well, I went to the local secondary school, boys' school, and I did go on to further education for a while. For maybe a year, I went to night classes to study law, but I kind of got sidestepped by music. I sort of gave up that pathway, really, just to sit at home and play guitar.
I want to come on to music and specifically ask you, do you come from a musical family, and what kind of point in your life got you turned on to music? And wanted to ask you what kind of early records you were buying and listening to, and kind of who were your favorite artists?
There was no musical background in our family at all. The reason I picked it up is because I was bored and I wanted to do something that was different for me. And also, when you're young, you want to piss your parents off. So by playing a guitar and wanting to join a band or form a band was something that they couldn't comprehend, quite rightfully so. So, these days, if kids pick up guitars, you're really excited about it and you can't wait for them to join a band. But in those days, it was a dangerous thing to be doing.
At the time, obviously, you had the British invasion, and you had the Beatles and the Stones, kind of the impact from the 1950s. We had this kind of British invasion, these kind of songwriters writing their own material. Did that play kind of a huge part in inspiring you to want to go out and be a musician?
Yeah, I wanted to be in a band like The Who or the Small Faces, a bunch of guys having a really great time playing songs, drinking beer, and traveling around the world. That seemed to be like the best possible thing for me, and that's how it turned out.
Can you recall the first instrument you owned? Can you
Yeah, I
remember?
can. It was a bass guitar, and it was a Bill Wyman bass guitar made by Vox, and it had black strings, and it was a beautiful instrument. And unfortunately, I don't know, you can't find them these days anyway. But it was a great bass guitar to play.
In terms of kind of learning songs and obviously going on to write your own songs as well, were you kind of self-taught, and what kind of instruments did you start playing initially?
I started playing the bass first, and I taught myself um, really how to sort of. I mean, it was just really something. It was like wearing a shirt. It was something that I just really felt comfortable doing, and it was the tools of the trade. It was something that you had to learn on to get to the next bit. It was kind of your apprenticeship, really.
Before we kind of go on and talk in detail about your prolific career in Squeeze as a songwriter, and obviously working with Glenn Tilbrook as well as a solo artist, I wanted to talk just a little bit about writing songs. When did you start writing your own songs? And what kind of songs were you writing at the time? And can you recall some of the first bands you played in before you joined Squeeze?
Well, the first songs I started writing was when I was 14, 15 years old. They were very fanciful. I was very prolific in my youth. Used to write 3 or 4 songs a day. Um, and the band that I was in before I formed Squeeze was a bunch of misfits, really, but we had a great time, and it was led by a guy called Nigel, who was an incredible guitarist, but very grumpy. He wasn't very keen on anybody else putting their songs in the set, which was annoying. But there was a lot of enthusiasm in what we had, and that's what you need, really, when you start a band. You need enthusiasm, you need ambition.
I want to talk about the story that I mentioned during the introduction. I kind of want to find out if it is a true story that you famously stole 50p from your mother's purse to put an ad in a shop window advertising for a guitarist, and Glenn Tilbrook responded to that advert. Is that a true story? And if so, can you recall your first meeting with Glenn and how Squeeze sort of came about off the back of that?
It's pretty much true, that story. I put an ad in a sweet shop window, and Glenn was the only person to answer the ad. And it was one of those things where I didn't question it. And I've never questioned it. I've kind of just accepted that that was what happened to me in that moment, meeting somebody who was extremely talented and shy like myself, I guess. But it was a coming together that happened almost without thinking and without any thought. It just became what it has been for the last 40 odd years. So it's extraordinary how those things happen.
It's an incredible story. You and Glenn meet and obviously formed Squeeze, I kind of wanted to ask how the other kind of band members became involved, and Jools Holland, for example, and some of the other band members. How did the band?
Jules was at school with Glenn. Gilson, we got out of the Melody Maker. He came down as one of the audition drummers. People came from different. We did have local players for a while, but they weren't up to scratch. They were lovely people, but they weren't really holding court like we were. Harry, our first bass player, was lovely human being and competent bass player to have at that stage of our career. So, it was what it was meant to be.
You and Glenn have obviously gone on to become one of the great British songwriting partnerships, and we can think of so many that have come out of British music. But what kind of why did you decide to kind of write your own songs, and why do you think you collaborate so well together?
Well, we wrote songs because that's what you did. That was, people wrote songs in those days, and the combination of lyrics and music was something that we just fell into. And good songwriting is something that we've always held close to our hearts, I think. And it was incredibly sort of fulfilling and beautiful, the amount of songs that we wrote, and how, I mean, not all of them were great, but it didn't matter. It was kind of just part of the journey.
When you write together, do you have a particular method, or do you have set responsibilities? How does the kind of partnership work?
Well, in those days, I was writing the lyrics and Glenn would write the music, and it was very separated.
I wanted to kind of go back to the kind of early music scene in Britain when Squeeze first became popular. How did your first recording contract come about? And do you think it was the strength of the songs that kind of got you recognized by the record companies and obviously went on to become very successful?
It was definitely the songs, not the look. We didn't have a look, so it was completely down to our songwriting and the fact that when we played live, we were an exciting band to watch and to be around, but we were never Duran Duran.
At that time, were there other bands at the time that you admired in terms of their songwriting, who were also kind of coming up at the same time as you were?
There were many in Jury and the Blockheads, Elvis Costello, Nick Lowe, so many. It's different. It was a songwriting flotilla of people, which was great to be part of.
Squeeze have broken up and reformed on, I think, 2 occasions. What were the reasons for the breakup, and what made you decide to go back to Squeeze?
The first time we were just really tired. We toured and recorded for 5 or 6 years without a break, so we needed a break. So that's what we did. And when we came back together, it was for a charity show, and we just got on stage without rehearsing, I think, and it just sounded amazing. So we decided just to get back together again. It just seemed like we put on the old boots and gone walking. It was brilliant, and that's when it's the right thing. The second time we broke up was when I decided, I suppose selfishly, that I didn't really want to tour anymore. I was tired myself. Glenn had much more energy and enthusiasm for what we were doing, and I didn't. So then the band sort of stopped. Well, it didn't stop. Glenn carried on, but it stopped for me.
You've written so many classic songs, obviously, with Squeeze, and you've written for other performers as well, some of which I mentioned during the introduction. artists like Jools Holland, who obviously was in Squeeze as well, Elton John, Wet, 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 Helen Shapiro, and Elvis Costello. Which of your songs are your favourites and why?
I think "Boy with a Problem" with Elvis Costello was is one of my favourite songs that I've written outside of Squeeze, because it was such a surprise to be asked to write a lyric for Elvis Costello. I mean, he's just like the best lyricist in the world to me. So I was petrified. I went round his house and I gave him the lyric, and he loved it. He changed a couple of lines, but by and large, it was kind of as it was written. And I think that woke me up. It kind of said, well, yeah, actually, I can write for other people, but it took a few years for me to branch out.
You've mentioned your admiration for Elvis Costello and working alongside him, but are there any songwriters that you greatly admire that you wish you would have worked with, or maybe in future could collaborate with?
Um, yeah, I mean, I dreamt about Taylor Swift the other night, and I'd love to write with Taylor Swift. Um, I don't know if I have a passion for writing for other people. I can barely write for myself. So, to go and sit in a room with somebody that I don't really know and to write a song with them is challenging in these days. I find it hard. It's difficult to know what to write about and how to let yourself be free. When you're young, you've got a lot of freedom of mind and spirit. And when you get older, you kind of get a little bit more reserved about what you want to do. So that freedom is something that I need to access to make that happen.
40 plus years of being in the music business, and we can cite so many kind of things you've done in your career. Obviously, writing alongside Glenn Tilbrook for many years. You've written lyrics for other artists, which we just mentioned. And you've also written as a solo artist as well. Would you say you prefer writing songs alone or in collaboration? And of all the performers you've collaborated with, which ones have you enjoyed working with the most?
That's a difficult question, really. I mean, writing with Boo Hewerdine is a joy because it's so simple and so much fun and rewarding. So I'd say writing with Boo is a very big. It gives me a big expression to do that. A good friend of mine, John Lind, who passed away very sadly a couple of months ago, was a great person to work with too. So, my history has been I've been able to write with lots of different people, and I have a lot of respect for the people that I work with.
We've spoken predominantly so far about your time in the UK and obviously forming Squeeze in Britain, but I didn't realize until sort of doing background research for the interview, that you lived in New York with your first wife and two children. I wanted to ask, what were your experiences like living in America, and what for you were kind of the main cultural differences, and what made you move back to the UK eventually?
New York was a very vibey place in those days, and the Ramones were playing in the bar around the corner, and Talking Heads, and music was pretty much, you know, fulfilled every night. Really, it was just it's different. New York's very different now, but then it was scary, but it was fun, lively. Um, moving back to England, it wasn't like I'd moved everything over to New York. I was really living at Cindy's flat, and I still had all of my stuff back in the UK. So, you know, I couldn't imagine living anywhere else at that time, and I still can't.
What kind of era was this then, when you lived in New York?
76, 70, 79, sorry.
So kind of just at the kind of peak was Squeeze kind of during the kind of early years, I guess.
Yeah.
Something else I didn't realize, another kind of string to your career. I had no idea about this whatsoever. That you managed Bryan Ferry and a band called the Stripes. I wanted to ask you how you got into music management and what made you pursue this area and manage those particular artists, because Bryan Ferry is obviously massive name in music with obviously Roxy Music and had a very successful solo career as well.
I fell into it. I wasn't thinking about it. It just came knocking on my door, and I was asked to go for an interview, whether I wanted to do it or not. I just thought, well, this is fascinating. Um, and I'm so pleased that I did, because he's such a talented human being. It was just, I learned a lot of lessons working with him about dedicating yourself to what you want to achieve and how you get that right. Um, and I suppose it's not really music management, it's mentoring in a way. It's kind of just being there for somebody, having been there myself. So, if somebody wants a hand to hold and I happen to have the time to do that, then I don't mind doing it, because it's just it's great to give back what's been given to me. It's been a gift, my career, and so to give it back is kind of a gift in itself.
When you were managing Bryan Ferry, were you kind of solely doing that, and how long for? Or were you still performing with Squeeze or solo at that time?
No, I was solely in his office. Yeah.
Okay. And how long were you sort of, how long were you as manager?
We worked together on and off, I suppose, for a couple of years. You know, the term manager is kind of a little bit loose, really. I was more like a dinner date.
Did you write some songs for Bryan as well?
I helped him. I held his hand, going through lots of different lyrics for an album he was working on back then, and that was inspiring.
I want to kind of move on to musical education, because you're heavily involved in songwriting retreat classes. I want to ask you what got you into teaching and how long you've been running the workshops.
I've been running songwriting workshops for 40 years, and I'm just about to start another one next week in Somerset. And again, it's not really teaching, because you can't teach songwriting. It's about just being there for other people and saying, look, if I don't know all the answers. I haven't written tons of hits particularly, but I kind of can throw ideas at you and keep you inspired, hopefully for a week. And that's really what my job is. It's not to say this is how you write a good song, because I couldn't teach that.
You've obviously met over the years many aspiring musicians and songwriters who've wanted to go on into the industry and be successful and popular like yourself. Have there been any that have gone into the music industry from kind of your tutorage, and have there been any names in particular that have struck you and you thought, seeing their writing and the way they play, that you think, I can really see them going on to successful things in music?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's so many, really. So many different writers. None of the names want to spring to mind, but Youngblood would be one. He's absolutely huge. He came to a songwriting workshop about 5 years ago and blew me away with his energy. And now he's got a YouTube following of millions, and he's got a huge record deal, and he plays in front of loads of people at Reading. And the good thing about Dom is that he hasn't forgotten his roots, and he still comes back to say hi, which is lovely.
I wanted to move on to the massive changes in music throughout the years, and you've obviously seen huge changes probably in the last 2 decades, obviously with the kind of digital revolution. I wanted to ask your take, because obviously as a songwriter and with royalties, how do you look at, the impact of streaming platforms and what artists are being paid for their work to be streamed and listened to on those kind of channels?
Well, once upon a time, the shop window for artists was very small, and now it's bigger than Harrods because you can put your music up as soon as you've recorded it, and hopefully people will find it. I don't have an overall view of streaming other than to say that it's here, like social media. It's part of our world. I preferred my world to be vinyl, and I preferred my world to not have social media in it particularly, but you have to embrace it. And I keep thinking I'm going to switch it all off because it's annoying. But then, when I'm doing shows, it's very useful to let people know where I'm going to be.
It's really interesting that you kind of mentioned the social media thing, because I sometimes find it frustrating as a fan of music to sometimes go to a gig and most of the audience are there kind of filming the gig on their phone rather than just listening and appreciating the performer on stage and just enjoying that moment. It's almost like they're trying to recreate a moment on a mobile phone, and I just find that so frustrating.
Yeah, I did for 5 minutes, and now it doesn't bother me because that's just part. It's almost like we've grown a technological arm to our bodies, which incorporates a mobile phone, um, and you can't go anywhere without people looking at a piece of glass. So we kind of live in a glass world, and as I said, it's about accepting that and not worrying about it.
Wanted to ask about new songwriters, and again, kind of just touching on technology, streaming platform, technological change in music. Do you think it's become increasingly harder for new artists to make a living in the music industry today? And what is your kind of general advice to people who come to your classes who say, I solely want to make a career and a living solely from playing my music?
I don't know. I mean, I get asked this question and I don't know the answer to it because, everybody's trying to jump through the same hoop at the same time, and there's not enough space for people to do that, I don't think. You've got to be very exceptional to stand out from the crowd. And, you've got to be thoughtful and different and appealing. And those kind of artists don't come along very often. So I would, I'm lucky enough to have been in a band when when there were lots of pubs to play in, and there aren't anymore. So I think it's harder for young people, and I wish them all success.
I want to just ask you a couple of final questions on touring, because obviously that's been very difficult for obvious reasons over the last couple of years. But do you still enjoy going out touring, whether it's with Squeeze or as a solo artist? And do you get kind of that buzz when you hear people sort of 40 years on singing your songs and knowing those famous songs kind of lyric for lyric? That must give you such a buzz.
Touring has become very much something that is an enjoyable space to be in, and therefore I really appreciate people buying tickets and coming to see Squeeze or to see myself play. Um, and I try and tell stories on my solo shows that you wouldn't get at a Squeeze show because there's not enough time to sort of sit and talk to people. So my solo shows, which are all up on my website, are all about having a conversation with the audience. And because a lot of us have been in lockdown or in different COVID places in the last few years, it makes it um, interesting just to talk to people about how they feel and get them to enjoy a couple of songs, really.
I went to one of you, I'd said obviously before we started recording, I went to one of your solo gigs probably about 5-6 years ago at St George's in Bristol. And I just find it fascinating to hear the kind of stories behind the songs and how a simple moment or something that happens in your life or a chance meeting or a relationship with your girlfriend, how that transforms into a song. I find that quite fascinating. When you write songs, do you find a lot of the stuff you write is literally about life experience, or are there times that you write where you want to maybe make a deeper message, whether it's a message that's political or...
No, I'm not a political writer, and at all. Not. I don't have that kind of ego or enthusiasm to do that. It's I write emotionally and domestically rather than politically, and I think that's kind of what I've always done. I think I would be chancing my arm to try anything else at this stage of my life.
We move on, Chris Difford, to the final list of quickfire questions. I ask all guests these same quick 13 questions, and it's just to kind of wrap the interview and kind of find out things they like, things they don't like, and just find a bit more outside of their career, what kind of things they're interested in. Number one, outside of music, what would you say is your favorite pastime?
Walking the dogs.
Obviously not, we've spoken so much solely on music, but I wanted to find out what your favorite film is and why.
There's a film called Nosedive, which is a Black Mirror film. I like it because it's futuristic and it's very funny.
When did that come out? It's not a film I'm aware of.
It's on Netflix.
Okay. Move on to novelists and books. Who would you say is your favorite novelist?
Damon Runyon writes short stories, or wrote short stories in the 40s and 50s, and he would be my favorite writer.
Have you ever wanted to write a novel?
I have, and I've never been able to.
Next one, if you could have had a different profession, what would it have been?
Songwriting.
Who in life would you say has been your greatest inspiration?
My mum.
Wanted to move on to newspapers. Do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
Which newspaper?
Yeah, do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
I don't really read a newspaper, but online I might skip through the Guardian.
What would you say is your favorite food?
Indian food.
Spicy, hot Indian food?
All of the above.
I was going to ask you next, who is your favorite cultural icon?
Yikes. Stephen Fry.
He's really interesting to listen to, isn't he? I've seen some of his debates on YouTube, some of the fascinating debates about religion and so on. You can say this. I wanted to ask what your favorite curse word is and why.
I tend not to curse. I think it's rude, so I don't swear.
what would you say is your favorite place or holiday destination?
Favorite destination is Cornwall, and it would be Foy, a place called Foy.
I think this is going to be a tricky one to ask you with so many musical influences, but who would you say is your favorite musical artist and what is your favorite album?
Elvis Costello is my favorite artist, and yeah, I think Spike is a great record.
What do you think of the new album?
Terrific.
And the last two, what would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
Getting up this morning.
And last one, Chris Difford, how do you wish to be remembered?
I don't know. I mean, I'll let other people judge that.
It's a nice answer. Thank you kindly for taking time out of your day to be a guest on Your Take. Appreciate you taking part in the interview, and you've obviously done so many interviews during your many years as a performer, and I'm sure you've been asked these questions so many time and time again. But I wanted to ask about the touring. Where can we kind of see you next? Are you on the road with...
If you go on my Instagram, there's a link tree to the dates, or go on my website, and all my solo shows are right there ready for you to come and say hi.
And any plans musically for the future, or any projects you're currently working on?
Not really, no. I'm just getting through each day one at a time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your time today. And yeah, wish you all the best with the touring.
Thank you so much. Thank you.